friends. I'm trying to see new ways that I can like sign into my videos, like a hello. I don't know if like hello everybody's really doing it too much for me anymore. But anyway, I hope you guys all had a fantastic weekend. This is my second time trying to do this video. So I filmed last night on Sunday night, and here I am filming again on Monday just because I wanted a different kind of lighting situation. So I'm showing up again in my best and my brightest and my tightest turtleneck. Like, I had planned on wearing this turtleneck for this video, and this turtleneck went MIA for like a year. First of all, let's start there. Like, I could not find this turtleneck, and then it like spawned randomly in my closet. I was able to find it, and then I put it on, and I realized like this turtleneck is hella tight. Like, I do not remember this turtleneck being this freaking tight, but it really is, and I'm uncomfortably hot right now. But all it's telling me is that I'm getting thicker. You know, I'm trying to say, like, I'm really getting thick, so I'm really not mad. It's giving very much, you know, corn-fed and cornbread. But anyway, you know, we're just gonna go ahead and move on to the topic of today's video. So this video is gonna be different than a lot of the other long-form videos that I have been doing recently. This is going to take on more of the template of, let's say, my opinion on Black history video that I did several months ago, because this is gonna be just a sit down. It's gonna be a sit down, and it's gonna be me talking and discussing and sharing, I guess, more of my opinion on certain things. So this video is going to be, again, about the Department of Education following the March 20th executive order by Donald Trump to fully abolish the department. I have spoken pretty extensively about the Department of Education. I have had two videos so far on the Department of Education. The first being, of course, the struggle for equal educational opportunities for Black students in the South, and the second being about IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So I've spoken pretty extensively in the past on this channel about the Department of Education, but now with the executive order literally being signed to abolish the department, I did want to sit down here and really just do a sign off on the Department of Education. This is a bit of a closure for me when it comes to this series on the Department of Education, and I figured that this is something that I really wanted to do. So this is, again, going to be just a sit down video where I'm going to be discussing a little bit of what I've discussed before, but I am going to be throwing in a little bit more of my personal narratives and opinions and things in this video. So let's go ahead and get started there. It seems like every single time I talk about the Department of Education on this channel, it only gets more relevant, just like when I talk about DEI and things like that. One thing that I did mention, and I've mentioned this several times on this channel when it comes to the Department of Education, it is not a surprise at all that this is something that has occurred under the Trump administration. In fact, during his campaigning, Donald Trump did specifically attack the Department of Education as a branch of government that they were moving to fully abolish. And this is not something that is new in any way, shape, or form with the Republican Party. I do think that when it comes to the way that the Republican Party moves in the modern era, it most definitely comes out of the Reagan administration. So a lot of the initiatives of the Trump administration do absolutely mirror those of the Reagan administration. The Department of Education was something that became its own separate entity under the Carter administration in the very, very late 70s, but it did not actually hit the ground running until 1980, which is incredibly ironic because in 1980, who won that election? Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan specifically did campaign to abolish the Department of Education. He was somebody who stood very fiercely against the Department of Education. Several videos ago where I historicized the plights for Black students in the Jim Crow era South to receive a fair and adequate public education, I do talk about how after Brown v. Board in 1954, you had the rise of segregation schools in the South. And these segregation schools, which were founded by a lot of school board members and specifically white parents, were a way for them to make sure that their children did not have to go to school with Black students. So these were private Christian academies, and because of that, they also were like they received federal funding, and they were also tax exempt, which makes the situation a little more complicated. However, in the 70s, they did start to lose tax exempt status because of the fact that they were openly practicing bigotry. So with the Department of Education being founded as a way to essentially have federal oversight over these schools and organizations, it does make a lot of sense that individuals like Strom Thurmond in particular, who was a South Carolina senator, they were kind of in the ear of Ronald Reagan to be like, okay, the federal government is overstepping its bounds here, and it is meddling in the business of our Southern culture once again, and we need to save the tax-exempt status of these schools because, of course, they were all losing tax-exempt status. So again, Ronald Reagan did make it a point in his term to actually abolish the Department of Education. He just couldn't do that in the 1980s. In 1996, I also shared that the GOP stated very blatantly that they wanted to move the running and oversight of education specifically to the hands of state and local governments and parents in particular, which is literally how we got those segregation academies. So again, as I said many times, it's not something that they're new to. It is something that is very true for the Republican Party. And I do want to just go ahead and mention some of the more familiar dog whistles we have here. Whenever you hear things like federal meddling into our business and it's coming from a conservative Southerner, it's typically tied to their ability to openly disenfranchise and be bigots. That's just how it's always been. It was like that with the Civil War when the federal government was hindering on their rights to enslave and traffic human beings. It was that exact same cry during the Jim Crow era when the federal government was hinging on their ability to openly practice things like voter suppression and other issues that were very prevalent in the Jim Crow South. So I think we've all become pretty familiar with that rallying cry. And today, with the Republican Party most definitely pushing back on DEI initiatives, which is something I'm going to get into, it does make a lot of sense that the Department of Education is something that they are targeting to once again push those decisions back to the state, because of course states have historically done an amazing job at doing those things. But again, that is the background here with Republicans and the Department of Education. They've just never been fans. And now, as of March 20th, at least, Donald Trump has signed that executive order to get rid of the Department of Education. I also want to mention that a lot of the blowback against the Department of Education does absolutely come out of the backlash that we've had recently against DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and those initiatives. So as I've stated many times on here, those initiatives do come out of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, when you're having things like the Voting Rights Act, you're having the Civil Rights Act, the Equal Opportunity Act, and all these things that are being pushed as part of Lyndon B. Johnson's plan for a greater society. That is when the United States decided that, hey, let us at least care on paper to make sure that we are showing and representing all of our citizens, regardless of the fact that these people have been historically marginalized and disenfranchised. So again, in this current administration with this blowback against DEI, a lot of the initiatives of the Department of Education most definitely come out of those DEI initiatives. Things like Title I and Title I, where you're essentially looking to provide a fair and adequate public education to kids who live in marginalized communities who are also part of historically marginalized groups and in more low-income areas. You also have IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, of course, which comes specifically to make sure that children who are differently abled also have access to a fair and public education. Pell Grants, in particular, are another initiative of the Department of Education, which does give access to a lot of lower-income students to attend college, something that can be very expensive and out of reach for them. So under administration where DEI is being attacked and diversity becomes this very bad thing, it does make a lot of sense, again, that the Department of Education that comes out of a lot of DEI initiatives is something that they 100% want to get rid of. So again, I do want to draw those parallels there between the Department of Education and the DEI initiatives as first rolled out during the Lyndon B. Johnson administration back in the 1960s. So people are scared, and rightfully so. Because we really are worried about the way that a lot of states are going to go about handling education, especially with no federal oversight. And one thing that I have mentioned before, the Department of Education wasn't actually exactly doing the best job at implementing its own initiatives. And when it comes specifically to IDEA, of course, when it comes to disabled students, less than half of states in this country were actually meeting the bare minimum requirements to make it with IDEA. Let's also note that school segregation, it's still giving that in a lot of places. And it's really not even just the South, it's like the entire country. So it's just one of those things where I'm just kind of like, okay, well, even with the Department of Education, this is how things were. So removing that federal oversight, what is the standard going to be? Recently, Oklahoma came under fire for a Senate bill that was proposed that actually attacked IEPs. And these are individual education programs for students with disabilities. Those are, it is one of like the 5 pinnacles for IDEA as it was first passed in the mid-1970s. And I'm going to go ahead and read part of the controversy behind that Senate bill and really just some of the terminology behind it. So as originally written, the bill would deem services like speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, counseling services, psychological services, and more as medically necessary, but not educationally necessary, meaning schools couldn't provide them to kids on IEPs. So this bill was really controversial, so much so that Oklahoma itself decided we're gonna go ahead and get rid of that. However, that is this very real reality and might be something that we are facing in the future with the complete abolishment of the Department of Education. Oklahoma is also catching a lot of hot water recently, specifically with Ryan Waters, who's the head of education there. And he has also pushed to implement Bibles, but not just any Bible, Trump Bibles in schools. And if he's in charge of, if he's the head of the way that education is ran in that state, when you really think about it, it's like with no federal oversight, these things can 100% be a reality. I also think of Rich McCormick, who is that very diabolical Georgia senator who was full blown on television just arguing against free and reduced lunch for children. Well, children should be working. And I'm like, okay, but what about children from marginalized communities? What about children from lower income backgrounds? Do we not think that those children deserve free and reduced lunch? There was another GOP man from Minnesota who was arguing the same thing. I don't know any hungry people in Minnesota. And I'm just these are the people who are going to be in charge of the way things are run on the state level. And I'm just sitting here that is a very, very, very awful future that I can sit here and think about for children who are in lower income communities and children who are disabled. It's just one of those things where I'm okay, this is gonna be the reality again. It's just okay to be that blatant with discrimination, and pushing for the abolishment of the Department of Education and that federal oversight again and pushing it back into the hands of the state and local governments. I'm it's really not giving. And I'm worried. That's all. That's really what I'm trying to say. I'm worried. I'm not somebody who really has faith in state and local governments to fully go ahead about initiating or implementing the initiatives of the Department of Education. When it comes down to it, are the people who are in charge of these school boards, are the state senators, are these individuals fully committed to making sure that all of the children in their constituency, regardless of the color of their skin, regardless of their disability status, regardless of their income level, regardless of where they live, have access to a fair and adequate public education? I don't believe it. I don't buy that. I do not think that they do. And so to push that back into the hands of these individuals is a very, very, very bad idea to me. And I think it's something that we most definitely as a country should be paying attention to. I also want to mention the recent controversy that was also in Idaho, where the principal had ordered that a teacher had to take down a sign that said, "Everybody's welcome here." And I'm so glad that people are calling that out for exactly what it is, because once again, under administration and under a social political culture where we're attacking DEI and diversity, what you're saying is that everybody is not welcome here. And one of the comments that I saw under there was I want this principal to full-blown go on camera and just let people know who is not welcome there. And once again, this is another thing where I'm just saying, these are the people who are in charge of education. And this idiot is very clearly saying, no, not everybody is welcome here. Once again, it's about creating that barrier. It's creating that wall. And a big part of me feels like we're going to see more and more and more of that with the abolishment of the Department of Education. So a little bit of background on me. I have a Bachelor's of Arts in History. And like a lot of history majors, people who graduate with a history in undergrad, I was almost a teacher, actually. I did get 2 job offers to be a teacher. The only one I seriously considered, though, was like in New York. It did pay definitely more than I could have ever made here, but I didn't end up taking it. It was like a charter school, and I do have my own opinions about charter schools and things like that. But being a teacher was something that I fully saw myself as being for a very, very long time. And under the current administration and with the way things are moving forward with the Department of Education, I really do feel for a lot of teachers. I feel for the teachers who are trying to make sure that everybody is included. I feel for the teachers who are trying to be as representative as possible in their classrooms. These are teachers who aren't making any more money. We're not seeing these department raises for teachers so that they can earn a higher income. Teachers are oftentimes cutting their own costs and their own salaries to make sure that they can provide for the students in their class. Teaching is a very, 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 very important job. And I think in this general culture where we're in many ways pushing back against intellectualism, I feel like we're fully in this era of anti-intellectualism in this country again. It's just one of those things where I really feel like we have completely decried and decimated what it means to be a teacher and how truly important that job. Teachers are in a lot of ways like these secondary family members. They are also parents to a lot of the students that they have. And it just seems like it's even that much more difficult for a teacher to really do and implement their job and really be an effective teacher if we are once again in this culture that is very anti-DEI and inclusivity. All you want to do as a teacher is to make sure that all your students feel included and they all have the best shot at whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish. And to be under a current social political culture where it seems like that is a problem, where you're being told to remove something that says everyone is welcome here, I really, really, really do feel for teachers. And this is going to fall hardest, very obviously, on the teachers around this country. And honestly, they're not making enough to deal with this mess. That's all, like, that's how I feel about it. They're not making enough to deal with this mess at all. I was scrolling on Reddit not too long ago, or maybe it was YouTube. I'm not sure. It's just when I'm doom scrolling, clearly, into my brain rot. And I had ran into a comment where somebody mentioned that to some people, to empower others who don't look or think like them is always going to imply that they are being depowered. It's kind of like whenever somebody says that when somebody doesn't know what oppression is, equality feels in a lot of ways like oppression. I always relate this to just a general lack of empathy, where for some people it is almost impossible for them to put themselves into the shoes of others. And one of the best examples I can really bring up in this video as it relates to the Department of Education is Brown v. Board. Brown v. Board was about school segregation, racial segregation, specifically as the way it was being implemented in the South. And a big win for Brown v. Board, like I mentioned before, was the way that the lawyers arguing it could essentially prove of the lasting effects, the damaging effects that Southern segregation had on the minds of Black students. And because of that, they were able to successfully win that case. However, when Brown v. Board was won, it opened up this other conversation about disabled students and how disabled students were also being marginalized and excluded from their school departments because of their disability status. In fact, Brown v. Board was what specifically also led into PARC versus the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in 1971, which is one of the defining court cases that led to the passage of IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, in 1975 under the Ford administration. And I wanted to bring that example here because here we see that empowering one group of people empowered another group of people. And I don't think a lot of people really pay attention to that. When you empower one group of people, when you empower a historically marginalized group of people, you are opening the door to empower so many people outside of that. The rise and the push for the representation of disabled students and pushing for them to have a fair and adequate public education also comes from the fact that a lot of disabled World War II veterans needed to be reinitiated back into society. So here we're pushing to empower these World War II veterans who are suffering these lifelong injuries, you know, coming from the war. And in doing so, we were also able to once again empower all of these, you know, the millions of disabled children around the country who were also being marginalized and disenfranchised in their communities. That is a perfect example of what I'm trying to say, is where for some people, they are always going to view this as me versus them, you know, us versus them, and in-group versus out-group. It's almost like they lack the ability, and truthfully just lack the empathy, to see that it is not going to harm you when another group of people is being empowered. And on the other hand, when you are specifically looking to marginalize a group of people, you are also marginalizing a lot of other people. You know, is almost collateral. And another good example I can think of when it comes to that is the Great Migration. The Great Migration, which was this it was this migration of up to 7 million Black American people from the American South to the more urban North, was something that came out of the political and social disenfranchisement of African Americans in the Jim Crow South. And a lot of these things, such as like the poll tax, which is something that, you know, they could essentially charge people to vote, but also just literacy tests, which were also put in place there so that the descendants of the formerly enslaved and formerly enslaved themselves during, you know, in the post-Reconstruction era South could not vote. Also disenfranchised poor white people. In fact, the Hillbilly Highway, which also happened at the same time of the Great Migration, comes out of the movement of many thousands and thousands of Southern disenfranchised whites who were themselves sharecroppers, who are moving up north for better they're moving up north for better economic opportunities. So here we see that specifically targeting and marginalizing a group of people, even though it's just on the basis of race, also disenfranchised other people on the basis of their income. But at the same time, empowering one group of people, Brown v. Board, led also to the empowering of disabled children in this country. I just don't understand how some people don't get that. It's almost like for some people, it is always going to be a team sport and us versus them. And I really wanted to like shed light on that, because I'm like, that's kind of how I view things in my mind. But it's like so many people just haven't gotten there yet. Like, it's like they're completely unable to see the correlation between how you can empower somebody who does not look like you, but somehow that can also still benefit you in the long run. I mean, it's literally not rocket science, but it's crazy to me that some people have not hit the mental age to get that yet. And these are people who are grown. I'm talking 50, 60 something, and you still at your big age can't put two and two together. That's crazy to me. Anyway, child. Anyway, that's all I really had to say. Again, this was just a sit down video. I didn't want to go and hit y'all with all that research. That's for next time. I just wanted to share, I guess be a little more forthcoming with my opinion about this whole thing now that the executive order has actually and finally been signed. So the Department of Education, RIP to her maybe, I'm not really sure. But yeah, again, I just wanted to do this sit down video because it'll also be much easier to edit. That's a big win, but trust me, there's more to it too. I just wanted to do this video because I just felt like I wanted to be, again, more forthcoming with my opinion. And in a lot of ways, historicize things as always in the long run, because that is what this channel is for. I will always be historicizing because I put that in the title. So if I'm not doing it, I need to clock out clearly. But as always, thank you guys so much for tuning in. And I thank you guys so much for your support. I do hope you guys have an amazing rest of your week. And I'll see you next time when I pull up some more unhinged newspaper stories of the past. But thank you guys so much. And you guys have a great night. Bye.